part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Segment that I was going to work on, just talking about something that is interesting in a history of Superman. Some of you who are listening to this episode may have listened to a previous episode of Digging for Kryptonite where host Anthony Desiato and I discussed the Superman serials, but I thought, I'd break down them a little bit more than what we discussed. It is a little bit harder to do this because they're not available to everybody. It's not like I can say, hey, go hop on a streamer and watch these now, thanks to the absence of DC Universe. And yes, as I said before, I do miss DC Universe compared to it just being on HBO Max. HBO Max just has not incorporated all the past content that I wish it had. But we're going to talk a little bit about the 1948 Columbia serial Superman. Serials now, if you're not sure, were basically chapters. There's 15 chapters. It was like supposed to make one kind of giant movie, but they were like 15 to 20 minute episode chapters that would play on a newsreel, basically, when you go to the movies. You would go to the movies, pay your ticket, and you would see like your news, you'd see a couple serials, some cartoons, and whatever the feature is. And that's how these played out. And what's interesting is looking at the historical context of this is 1948 is Superman with Kirk Alyn and Noel Neill, the movie serial. 1950 is the sequel, which would be Superman vs. Atom Man. And then 1951 is the feature film, which I had reviewed before, Superman and the Mole Men, which then launches into 1952, the Superman television series. So, not a bad time to be a Superman fan, as you're getting basically almost back-to-back-to-back Superman properties being released. Not bad for that time, if you think about it in the stretch of just how things come and go, and then you think, you lost Superman from the 1956, I want to say it was, or 58, I could be wrong, I have to look that up, of when the Adventures of Superman ended, to almost a 20-year gap until we got Superman the movie. But enough with all that. Superman the serial, the first chapter starts out very interesting. We get a narrator telling us about Krypton and Jor-El. Chapter 1, Superman Comes to Earth, which we've covered before on the podcast during pilot season a couple years back, but I'll talk about it here. We meet Jor-El and the First Laura, and they have the baby, and Jor-El goes to the council. That has a wonderful use of animation, blending in what happened and to Krypton, showing the explosion, showing the world that was built for the hero that we would know as Superman, and really laying the groundwork. My favorite was just the fact that there was a volcano for Krypton, which was cool to see, just the explosions as the planet, and it hits all the correct beats that we need for the idea of Jor-El goes to the council, presents his findings, his plan, what happened, and tells them, hey, the planet's going to explode. And they don't listen. Rodan, I think, was one of them, which is funny because it's very similar to what do you call it? Rodan, which is a Godzilla villain. And if you remember, Solomon is a huge Godzilla fan and lover of all things Godzilla. Jor-El launches his baby to Earth, and there's a lot of similar beats to this as there is in the pilot for The Adventures of Superman, which is a fun comparison to do sometime. But he is found by Eben and Sarah Kent, they take him home, and they name him Clark. Once again, we still have the narrator kind of telling us the story, and then we get 3 kind of scenes of young Clark. We see young Clark as a child, I would say maybe a little older than a toddler, maybe about 5, 4. It's a hard barometer because my daughter is 5, but she acts like she's 8, and Solomon's 7, and you would almost think he's 10. So it's a hard barometer for me to look at my kids and try to adjust these ages. But he's pulling a cow, like a mule cart on the farm. And then we get Clark as, I'd say about 12, 13, and probably about 10 or 12. So we'll go with 11 as a median. Sarah loses her watch in the hay, and Clark goes in and finds it using his x-ray vision. And one thing that's always fun with these serials is just remembering what powers Superman had and didn't have at the time. And the last kind of flashback is Clark, now as a teenager, outside, and we learn that there is a twister on the way. And he goes to save Pa, who's out there. And he gets electrocuted from some fallen electric wires, but he's okay. And then we jump where the narrator later as man, and we have this, Sarah and her dressed down, even in his overalls where he's a farmer, and then Clark sitting there now, Kirk Alyn, in a full suit, glasses, reading a book. And they come in, they have a conversation about power and responsibility, very pre-Uncle Ben. And Sarah presents him with his uniform suit, and they have kind of, well, I wear this when I do things to help people, and even says, like, you'll be some type of a Superman. And then there's like this hard cut of Clark walking outside in the same suit, carrying a briefcase, and the narrator, what makes it humorous is he says, shortly after that, his foster parents passed away, and Clark moved to the city. And it was just kind of funny because, had you not had that dialogue, you'd almost think that after getting the suit from Eben and Sarah, he was just going to head out. And then we get a cutaway of Lois and Jimmy on the train, and we see the train track has been damaged. And it's funny because I put, there's either palm trees in Kansas or Metropolis. But we have Clark at the train station, and he uses his vision and sees ahead on the track, and he runs behind a bush, changes his clothes, and pops out as Superman. And that cuts, and each serial ends with like a crashing gong-esque sound, and then it's like, will Superman do this? Come back to this theater next week. And every serial ends on a cliffhangering beat, so that you come back next week and see what happened. But that's how this one ends. We get him in the costume of Superman, and that's it. So, Chapter 2, Depths of the Earth. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Noelle Neal is a blessing as Lois. And it's worth watching the serials just for her performance, and then later her in the George Reeves show. But Superman runs ahead, straightens the track, then quickly changes back to Clark, shows up in Metropolis, and gets in a cab, and the cab's like, where do you want to go? He's like, I don't know, take me to a newspaper. Cabbie's like, well, the Daily Planet is the biggest one out. All right, take me there. Takes takes Clark to the Daily Planet, and we have basically him going to Perry's office, demanding a story. He wants a job. Perry's like, give me this story. There's been a mining incident, and people are stuck. Jimmy and Lois are there, but can't, get in. So we get our first Superman flying scene of Clark changing, and they had to use animation, like hand-drawn animation for the flying. And Clark takes off. He gets there, and basically there's been a cave-in, and they're discussing, like, well, what's happened? Well, there's a cave-in, and we find out that one of the people told Lois about a back access point into the mine. And Lois went down and had the cave-in. Clark uses his X-ray vision, identifies Lois, and boom, that's the end of the chapter. It leaves us on the cliffhanger of what will happen to Lois. Will she be left? Will Superman save the day? Come back to this theater next week. So you'll see the repetitive nature of the beats of the story. Now, Chapter 3, Superman in the Mine, starts out immediately picking up where the last one ended, which makes me question about the production style of how they did these serials. And it's Superman saving Lois. Clark gets the scoop, beats them to the story. They're back in Perry's office. Lois is upset. Clark gets a job. Perry has this great line where Lois and Jimmy pop in, and they're yelling about the story, who got the scoop. And Perry goes, Clark Kent, new reporter. And Clark goes, what about that job? And Perry's like, you've been on the payroll for hours, Kent. And it's just kind of, it's hilarious because you're like, yeah, like it's that old newspaper, yeah, see, kind of talk, gangster aesthetic that you hear. And it's a good time. Now, he tells Lois to fix Clark up with the desk. Lois is a reporter, and there is also a secretary. Turn the page here of the notes. Now, what's funny is we get a scene of the gangster shooting bullets. And we start to get this type of scene almost in every episode of gangsters shooting bullets, bouncing off Clark. And we have this kind of almost montage that Superman is doing things because we have all these newspaper headlines of Man of Tomorrow, Man of Steel. And it's very interesting because we're in the third chapter. And in the third chapter, we're introduced to a meteorite that fell that Clark goes to figure out and see a Professor Leeds, and he opens it and Clark passes out. And Leeds immediately thinks Clark's dead. And that ends chapter 3. And what's the tagline? Come back to this theater next week. Chapter 4 is called Man of Steel. This picks up immediately after where Professor Leeds, Dr. Leeds, closes the box. The radiation from the kryptonite's gone. Clark gets back up. And the humorous part is Clark gets back up and he goes, all right, open it back up. And Leeds looks like, what? He opens it. Clark falls back down. Leeds covered it. And Clark, just as I suspected. I'm going to tell you something. And he says, turn off the light. And Clark goes in the corner. And you have this kind of very slow transition as Clark changes his clothes. And it's like, all right, turn the light back on. And now he's Superman. And we're introduced to the Spider Lady. The Spider Lady is our villain for the series. Now, what's funny is in this, Lois thinks Clark is holding out on her. And that Kent is trying to always scoop her. Now, hijinks occur, which is a common thread because sometimes you're not really sure how the characters went from point A to point B because Lois is kidnapped by the Spider Lady, by some men in suits, and that's going to happen a lot. And she's strung up on these electric webs. And the Spider Lady starts to electrocute Lois with these webs. And that's the end of Chapter 4. Chapter 5 picks up. It's called A Job for Superman. Chapter 5 starts with Lois falls down. She's not dead. Okay? It's very important. And Superman comes. He stops the car, stops some gunshots. We get the great shots of him. We get the every shot of Superman getting gunshot. Saves Lois. The Spider Lady turns, basically somehow knows the weakness, has predicted it, has a piece of kryptonite. Lois goes to see Leeds. She gets in a car crash. Superman then shows up, stops the car from catching fire, gets Lois, and they steal the kryptonite. And that's the end of that chapter. Now, I do want to say what's interesting about Noelle Neal, just her pedigree in the world of Superman. She's in the serials. She then later appears in the Adventures of Superman, seasons 2 through 6. She would later be in Superman the movie as Lois Lane's mom. She also appears in Superman Returns, and then appears in an episode of Superboy, season 4, episode 6. So that ends this discussion. Just a short little conversation about the first 5 chapters of the serials. Sometimes there's a lot to discuss, sometimes there isn't, and that's kind of the nature of these serials. You would think they would be like a streamer where you could binge them. No, you can't, because there's a lot of puff and repetitiveness that keeps stalling the story from moving. It's not like broke down in melodrama, where you would think like, oh, there's character development, because there's really not. But we'll get there. So, good listeners, thank you, and remember. Remember to check out Krypton Report on all social media platforms. Go to linktree.com/Krypton Report. You find all of our information right there. And if you want to keep Krypton from exploding, join our $1 a month Patreon. That's right, for $1 a month, you'll get extra special content that you don't get on the main show, like movie commentaries and whatever else comes out of our mouths. So check it out, patreon.com/Krypton Report.
If you are like Tyler and James and can't get enough super talk, check out these other podcasts. Digging for Kryptonite, Supergirl Radio, The Last Sons of Krypton, the Superboy Legacy Podcast, All-Star Superfans, Superman the Animated Podcast, The Aspiring Kryptonians, Always Hold On to Smallville, Caped Wonder, The Geek of Steel, and Truth, Justice, and Hope Podcast.
Hey, we're going to press pause and hear a few words from our other podcasts on Press Play Podcast Network.
Hello, Brooks here with the Books with Brooks monthly book club podcast. Here's how Books with Brooks works. We read one book a month, and then we talk about it. Classics like Stephen King's The Shining, debut novels like We Are the Brennans by Tracy Lang, and tons of other compelling, life-changing stories, one book and 1 month at a time. So come read along with us, and then listen in.